Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm Jonathan Green.
And I'm James Carberry.
Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. Today we are joined by Jason Burt. Jason is the owner of Evolve Holdings. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate being on the show. I'm excited.
Well, it's great to have you here. We're actually going to be talking about the three things more important than revenue growth today, which I think is very cool. But before we get into all that, Jason, of course, maybe you can tell us a little about what you and the Evolve team are up to these days.
Yeah, so Evolve Holdings, we are a consulting company. There's myself as the owner, and then I use many other people in the industry to work with different companies. We work with mainly manufacturing companies, but we work with in a lot of different areas, all the way from I've worked with commercial farming, service companies, lots of different companies. And what we do is we really help provide some operational efficiency for companies. So we're versed in lean manufacturing or the Toyota production system. That's our base knowledge that we bring to the table. And we've really taken it beyond just an operational focus. We really look at an entire company and help take companies that are potentially in the red and turn them around and bring them back to profitability. So a lot of our primary customers are either individual company owners, or we do work with some equity firms as well, where we provide, all the way from the operational due diligence from the very beginning, all the way through helping them develop a strategy to turn the company around.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know that you guys at Evolve have seen some tremendous growth, especially in 2017. So part of the reason why we wanted to track you down, we wanted to tap into your skill sets and your knowledge. And again, today we're going to be talking about, again, these three things more important than revenue growth. You talk to people, and that is a metric of success, one of the first things that people always point to. But there are things even more important than that. So before we get into what those three things are, you had also sort of mentioned this Toyota production system, this idea of lean manufacturing. So maybe we can dive into that a little bit first.
Sure. Really quickly, I mean, Toyota, back very early on in their journey, they developed what they call the Toyota production system, and it's been around for many, many, many years. Started coming over to the U.S. Late 80s, early 90s, really started gaining some popularity, and it really turned into what we've termed here in the U.S. as lean manufacturing. There's a lot of people that try and draw a distinction between the two, but it's essentially developing a culture within a company to solve problems and to, create this whole employee movement of how do they solve problems on a daily basis to make your company better. There's a lot of tools and techniques that go along with it as far as just-in-time manufacturing and creating pull systems and a lot of technical stuff. But essentially, it's creating a culture around how do you improve your business on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think in one of the email exchanges that we had, you had mentioned that it is not just a manufacturing philosophy. It is actually a business philosophy, really for any size business.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said earlier, I've worked in many different industries and many different size industries, all the way from early startups to, hundreds of millions of dollar, companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. And it really is a scalable philosophy, or I wouldn't call it a strategy, but a way to do business. And we see it in all areas from, across the entire value stream of the company, all the way from, working directly with suppliers and how materials going to a company, the IT side, the, product development cycle, and then obviously operations. One of the large industries that has really taken on a lot of this is the healthcare field, in fact, as well. So lean is really spread across many, many industries and many size companies.
Yeah. Well, we had talked about that many companies are focusing on growing revenue only, but what are some other things that you think these businesses should be focusing on in addition to or instead of?
Well, and don't get me wrong, growth is so important in a company. Obviously that's a lot of your guys' conversation here on your other guests, and I don't want to minimize how important growth is for a company. As an entrepreneur, as someone who's a business owner, owns other companies as well, growth is obviously something that we all should be paying very close attention to. My biggest struggle is I walk into many, many companies, whether it be an acquisition that one of my equity firms made, or it's a company that's struggling currently with profitability. And so many times, I'd probably say, 80 to 90% of the times, the story is that they were profitable, they were in a good, stable condition, but they grew significantly, and now they're losing money. So take a company, I see this story all the time. It was a $2 million smaller company making, significant EBITDA and profitability for the owner, significant growth, and now they're a $10 million company and they're losing money. So what I struggle with, it's not the growth, it's growing in the right way. It's understanding what that growth is going to do to your company and making sure that you're making the right moves and the right steps along the path so that it's profitable growth. Because I see it over and over where growth hurts companies more than it's, and it's obviously the industry I'm in. I'm seeing these distressed companies, but I see that so frequent that it's bothersome for when I hear these companies that all they're focused on is growth. And I just want to make sure that companies realize they need to look at the other areas of their business to make sure they can handle that growth.
And so the three things that you had mentioned to me were companies that should be focusing on growing margin, profitability, and capability.
Exactly. And it's got to be a holistic look at all three of those, right? So, take the first one, margin, for example. Margin is a great, metric or line on the P&L to be looking at, but it's not the whole story. Neither is profitability, neither is capability. Any one of those looked at on a very individual basis can make you or allow you to make the wrong decision. So take a company who is building a product or providing a service and their margin is, 30%, 40%, whatever the number is. They can go make, and I see this quite often, they've got a machine that's able to meet the customer's expectations, but they can go buy the $1 million machine. And on paper, because it's, twice as fast, it'll show that their margin goes to 50%. Well, that makes sense. Their margin is growing, but all that overhead that they took on, if they don't have the business to fill that up and the business to be able to sustain that, then at the end of the day, it's not necessarily a good move for them. And I see companies making those mistakes all the time, where they're making those decisions and building this overhead structure that really hurts their growth, or they've grown significantly and they're not making any more money than they were when they started off.
Got it. And these three sort of key areas that companies should be focusing on, I mean, this is also part of this idea of lean manufacturing, and you've talked about that there are consultants out there only teaching the tools, but so where's that disconnect then?
Well, I think that example I just used, and there's others as well. I think it's kind of that disconnect. So I think if you're only, let me back up here. As I look at lean manufacturing or the Toyota production system, I said earlier that it's really this culture of solving problems, this very holistic approach to looking at your business and guiding it down a path of growth and sustainability. Many consultants will go in and they're very focused on one small part of the business. And they'll do a lot of, I'll say, kind of in quotes, good things in that one area of the business, but it may not be the best thing for the business as a whole. A great example of that is I had a client in Wisconsin, and they were a lighting company. And the first thing, when they first hired me, they immediately said, we need help in operations. That was their initial, this is where we need help. And I think any other consultant except for our group would have just said, okay, let's dive into operations. Well, when we actually took a step back and started looking at the bigger picture, they had different issues that were going on that weren't operationally focused, or that we need to focus on other areas of the business to really help them drive profitability and get better with their customer. They had issues with their sales cycle, the way business was coming in. They had, different things that were going on with their new product development cycle. Those were more important than the operations side. So when many of my, peers in the industry are very tool focused and they want to go in and just dive straight into operations and just make these very tactical changes, I think it's very important that anyone that's helping guide a company, through some difficult times, that they're looking at the bigger picture, all the way from the growth side of things and revenue, costs, capability, and putting that whole picture together to make sure that the resources, which are finite in any company, are being used in the right way and the appropriate way to be able to dig them out of the hole or to be able to get them to that next step within their journey of the company.
That's fantastic. One of the last things is this idea that this lean process can create a culture of improvement. How is that different from sort of the other things that we've been talking about during this interview?
Well, I think the culture, there are specific things that are embedded in the Toyota production system. Essentially, the Toyota production system, to kind of simplify it, or lean manufacturing, it's a process of continuing to highlight problems that are going on within your company and providing a structure in which you can solve those and then highlight the next problem. So it's this constant exposing problems and solving them. And I think with that being a culture, there's certain things that you can implement, certain things that we can create on the shop floor, ways to get leadership involved, ways to get the employees involved, because we want that to become the everyday cycle, the everyday activity of everyone within the organization as they're looking for and seeing, wow, this is the next barrier in front of me, the next hurdle I need to fix. And then they have the tools and the capability and the support from leadership to be able to solve them. That type of culture is not something that just happens overnight. It's something that has to be driven through the whole organization and kind of put on a, platform, but really just kind of the foundation is created for people to be able to act that way. I think it is a very common nature for us to not want to see problems, for us to not want to expose, people don't, that's not tradition, by nature of us as human beings, right? We don't want to go to our boss and say, oh my gosh, here's this problem that's happening. It's very easy to say, no, I don't want to hear the problems, just fix it. Yeah. But in the Toyota production system and lean manufacturing, the whole culture is how do we expose those and how do we get everyone working on solving those? And that I think is a very different culture than many companies end up developing. Because they're very focused on just getting things out the door. And I think it takes a strategic mind to start to develop that culture for improvement on a daily basis.
Got it. Well, and I know, Jason, that you're going to have a number of resources that you want to leave our listeners with. But before we do that, there's a question we've been asking a lot of our guests. And, obviously we had talked about this a little bit before the episode, but in terms of your legacy, whether that is personal, professional, or a combination of the both, kind of what is the legacy that you are hoping to leave behind at the end of the day?
I think what I get excited about, or what I really want to see, or be able to look back on, is I get excited about saving companies. Many companies that I go into, they're on the brink of closing down. They're at a point of, financially, struggling to make it through the next day. And it's exciting to me when I'm able to go into a company and, whether it's, 100 employees, 500 employees, or 20 employees, and be able to help guide them to a place where that company is continuing to exist. Or if we're, fighting overseas competition and we're, allowing, keeping that company here in the U.S. instead of allowing it to, head to China or somewhere else. Those are the things that excite me. So I want to be able to, towards the end of my career, be able to look back and and hear from different business owners or different companies that are still here because of the work that we were able to do at Evolve and the teaching and the creating that culture of continuous improvement at these companies where they were able to sustain long term versus hitting that cliff and not being able to recover. So for me, that's the legacy that I'm hoping to leave, is a lot of very stable companies in my path.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, obviously it's a beautiful legacy to leave behind, and very outward focused, which is fantastic. Jason, if any of our listeners, they want to get in touch with you, they want to find out more about today's topic, they want to find out more about Evolve, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Well, I think the first thing is they can go to my website, which is EHIP Consulting, which is EHIIPconsulting.com. And if you go to /B2B for your listeners, there'll be a nice landing page there to welcome them. You can also, when you go onto my website, there will be a pop-up. I have a simple executive guide that can be downloaded for any business owners or anyone that's considering the lean TPS path for their company. It's a very simple little ebook. It's only about 10 or 15 pages. It's a really easy read. That'd be a great way to kind of get to know a little bit more about what we're about. But you can connect with me on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, and then I also have a short YouTube page where you can go and just hear some of my simple thoughts. I just record them and put them out on YouTube as I leave different clients and different learnings that I have. So some simple tips out there on YouTube. So those are the best ways. And then probably the last way is if it's, you really want to take that next step, you can schedule a call with me on my website or reach out personally. And I'd love to talk with you and discuss your business and see if there's a way that we could work together.
That's incredible. Well, Jason, thank you again so much for taking some time out of your schedule and sharing your lessons with our audience today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.